Today's program is done in cooperation with the East-West Institute, a global action-oriented think and do tank. The Institute recently convened a cybersecurity summit, bringing together experts from the front lines combating cyber attacks. We have borrowed a few clips from this event and will draw insights from today's speakers. With us in Brussels is Dr. Greg Austin from the East-West Institute and Serdar Orçar, Managing Director of Hewlett-Packard Turkey. Greg, could you please tell us about the East-West Institute's cybersecurity program?
Well, hello Alan, thank you for inviting me to the program. It's a great pleasure to be here. The East-West Institute's cybersecurity initiative is global in scope. We're trying to encourage governments which have problems with each other and the private sector to become involved in new global efforts to address some of the vulnerabilities and threats that we face. As you and your viewers will know, the cyber attacks on global corporations and governments have been multiplying, and as far as we can tell, at our recent summit in London, the second Worldwide Cybersecurity Summit, I think the common verdict was that we're losing the battle against cybercrime. It's increasing in scope and intensity, and the East-West Institute is out there working with global corporations, with governments to try and make sure that we can respond to this.
I'd like to take a video bite from Francis Delon's keynote remarks. Mr. Delon is the Secretary General for National Defense of France. He raises awareness of our cyber vulnerabilities.
Stuxnet has shown that it is possible to succeed in attacking an information system controlling an industrial process, even when physically disconnected from digital communication network. All our industrial process control system can, therefore, be considered as potential targets for determined attackers.
The idea of our industrial processes being targets is of great concern. Greg, what assets in the CORRIDOR39 region do you see as the most vulnerable to cyber attacks?
The question of Stuxnet, of course, is most applicable to Iran, which is directly in your area of interest. And the attack on Iran's centrifuges at one of its nuclear enrichment facilities is directly related to other countries of the region. Of course, one might say that there's special peculiarities to the both politically and in operational terms to the nuclear plant in Iran. But I think what the Stuxnet attack shows is that a determined country does have the power to bring down and sabotage the industrial processes in any other country at all. While it's hard to think of other targets in the CORRIDOR39 area of interest, one could, for example, consider the oil refinery facilities in different countries. One could consider the other transportation systems, and one could even consider, for example, operations of Pakistan's nuclear facilities.
It's alarming that Stuxnet can destroy centrifuges and also sabotage other vital security and transportation infrastructure. Serdar,
yes.
Thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Which assets in Turkey are in danger of being intruded, manipulated, or sabotaged?
Mm-hmm. I think if we're talking about cybersecurity, we have to talk about digitization, right? Information and communication technologies bring many opportunities to individuals, to private enterprises, to state enterprise, to governments. But at the same time, of course, when a process is digitized, when an organization is digitized, or our individual lives are digitized, we are exposed, because information then is in the digital networks, is in the computer networks, and that information can be accessed by someone else, can be stolen, can be manipulated. So these are the different variations of cyber crimes, and that's why we're talking about cybersecurity. So any organization, any process which is digitized is exposed. Let me give you one example from banking, for example. We know that today the biggest branches for many banks are the web branches, which means that all the branch processes, all the services you can get from a physical branch, you can also get it from a web branch. But at the same time, of course, it's a kind of an exposure, because then attackers, hackers, cyber terrorists can come in, can get the individual data of your customers, can get the credit card details, can manipulate bank accounts, can transfer money from one account to another without the knowledge of the owner of the account. So you're exposed. That's one example. The other example is about the infrastructure, because any infrastructural thing is very strategic, and then if you're exposed, it's a big exposure. Let's take the electricity infrastructure, and let's say that there is more and more smart grids implemented around the world, especially in developed economies. A smart grid is great because in a sense you optimize your electrical usage, you kind of have the right type of electrical infrastructure which avoids unnecessary electricity consumption. That's great, but at the same time you're exposed because this electricity infrastructure is digitized and it's controlled digitally. The information is there, the control is there, the process is there, so it can be manipulated, it can be damaged, it can be stopped.
And how much is Turkey using the smart grid technology for versus say Germany or Europe?
Yeah, I think on the smart grid one, Turkey is not that far developed. But I mean, if you look at the cybersecurity investments in Turkey, we see three big industries investing heavily into cybersecurity. One is banking and other financial institutions. The other one is different government institutions. Of course, we have to talk about defense and security here. And the third one is telecommunications and broadcasting. So these three industries are the ones which are most exposed, have the highest risks, have the most sensitive and critical customer information, trade information, or of course state information, intelligence information, and they are heavily investing into cybersecurity.
So Turkey probably less vulnerable to attack on a smart grid or to maybe refinery technology or others than Europe or America.
I think we can apply the logic here. If something is less digitized versus the other industries, or some companies or some processes, then you're less exposed. But this is also changing. We talked about the Stuxnet thing. So when you talk about a manufacturing plant, and when you look at only the automation of this manufacturing process, it's not big IT usage. But in a sense, in the manufacturing process, they use IT, information technology, and then some cyber terrorists, cyber attackers, or other attackers are producing different malware, different viruses and worms, which goes into that electronic manufacturing plant and destroys their manufacturing process, brings it to a stop. So even with less digitization, you're getting more and more exposed. If there is little IT in anything you use, then there is the risk of having a cybersecurity issue.
Our next clip is from Sir Michael Rake, chairman of BT Group. He speaks of a cyber arms race.
You know, I don't think personally it's an exaggeration to say now that with the dependence that we have on systems, that basically you could bring a state to its knees without any military action whatsoever. You know, a small state could be absolutely brought to its knees because everything could be closed down. Its life systems, its energy systems, its medical systems. And clearly, this means that we are getting into a sort of a cyber technology race from a warfare point of view, from both a defensive and an offensive point of view.
Greg, is this an overstatement? And are developing countries truly more vulnerable?
Well, it sounds like it's an exaggeration, and I guess we'd all like to think it's an exaggeration. But I think the example of Estonia and Georgia some years back show that small countries of that scale, with that sort of dependence on the internet and interconnectedness, are very vulnerable to attacks. What happened in Estonia and what happened in Georgia were relatively low technology attacks. They're not really on the scale of Stuxnet or other attacks that we've seen more recently in terms of complexity or in terms of scale. So imagine if a determined country wanted to apply techniques like Stuxnet or to apply criminal attacks on the scale that we've seen recently against some of the world's leading corporations. Imagine if they were applied against a small country like New Zealand or perhaps even South Africa or in the CORRIDOR39 region, say perhaps Egypt or Saudi Arabia. I think it is possible to bring down the economy of small countries with determined cyber attack.
Greg is talking about major corporations and even economies being sunk. Serdar, what about the Turkish stock exchange, for example? Could that be intruded, manipulated, and brought down?
I think, we can talk about the stock exchanges around the world. Let's not specifically focus on the Turkish stock exchange. If we apply the same logic again, stock exchanges are organizations with very heavy information and communication technologies usage. So they are very highly digitized, which makes them very vulnerable. But on the other hand, the ICT organizations of these institutions, in a sense, are very highly skilled. They have very complex investments, and they know how to defend themselves. So they are vulnerable, but they are well protected. And that's why I think we are not seeing many big events in stock exchanges around the world. But on the other hand, we shouldn't forget that, looking at the Stuxnet example, looking at another example, there's another virus which was developed mainly to attack banking systems on computers. Now it's been said that these cyber attackers are developing this same thing for the mobile environment, for the mobile devices. So the attackers, hackers, cyber terrorists, however you call them, are adapting themselves. So organizations should also adapt themselves in responding to their attacks.
So at Hewlett Packard, you're working for major corporations, even governments, and even possibly even bourses around the world.
Yes.
So when you do your worst case scenario assessments to put up your firewalls and various safeguards, what are the threats that you're looking for, say, at a stock exchange? What would, if someone wanted to do damage to a stock exchange, what would they do?
It might be several things, actually. When we talk about a stock exchange, I think one easy thing that comes to mind is the personal identification or personal data of the customers who are buying and selling stocks. That's one thing, and you can access this data and you can use this data. One step further might be, there are many technologies called phishing, like you come up with a content which looks like the real content but which is not the real content. So people can manipulate the content, and investors can take decisions based on wrong content with real results attached to it. That might be one other thing that might happen. You may see wrong prices, they can manipulate the prices. When it's virtual and digital, the thing you're looking at, all of us, we think is the real thing. If some way, somehow we're not looking at the real thing and we're doing something thinking it's the real thing, then you're very much exposed.
Could someone on a commodities exchange, could someone come in and change what the buyers and sellers are seeing as a price of a commodity, perhaps even bring it down, like perhaps the price of oil, bring it down $10 and just cause, or even the cost of a certain currency, and just causing major chaos in world markets?
Exactly what I meant. And that's the real terrorism, right? Because then you spread panic and you spread, because something happens, you think that was the real content, you understood it was not the real content, people had taken decisions, and there are billions of dollars of losses. It might definitely, there is a risk.
So the threats are real, not just perceived. Are governments doing enough? Melissa Hathaway, former senior director for cyberspace for national security and homeland security, said at the conference, over 100 nations have cyber capabilities, and the attacks, whether it's from a hacker or whether it's espionage or whether it's a broader base state-sponsored weaponization, there are many involved in this, which is why many have to participate in the conversation to address and assure that it doesn't escalate. Greg, does American Homeland Security envision an inclusive approach, perhaps a kind of a public-private partnership cooperation between governments and corporations to address cybersecurity?
Yes, thanks, Alan. Well, the United States government has been moving perhaps a little slowly to recognise the international dimension of cybersecurity, but we've seen very strong movement in that direction by the Obama administration in particular. So when President Obama announced his 10-point plan for national cybersecurity,